And he had an idea for a song, and he asked me to help him write it, and I did. And I recorded it. And I doubt anybody in here has heard it. But I want to share it with you today for a couple of reasons. Number one,
At 87 years old, country great Bill Anderson has told more stories than most people will ever hear. Songs, secrets, and grief are hidden beneath that soft-spoken smile. However, there is one story he has never told, until today. A story spanning 6 decades and centered on a single conversation with the man who has haunted him ever since. Hank Williams, Sr. In a previously unseen communication, Bill reveals what Hank told him that night. Words that almost drove him to abandon music forever. For years, fans wondered why Bill was so hesitant to talk about Hank. Why was there a shadow behind his tributes? Now the truth is coming out, and it isn't what everybody expected. Because one of the greatest country voices of all time concealed a warning, a wound, and a mystery. Bill Anderson has been clinging on for his entire life. Bill Anderson, often known as Whisperin' Bill, grew up in the quiet hum of South Carolina and was born on November 1st, 1937. Long before the bright lights of Nashville discovered him, Bill was a soft-spoken dreamer whose thoughts had weight. He wasn't a powerhouse singer in the conventional sense. His voice did not soar, it slid. Honey on Warm Toast is smooth, unhurried, and thoughtful. His songs weren't all hits. They reflected the world as he viewed it, tender, fragile, and full of grief. But before Bill became one of country music's most celebrated songwriters, he was just a college student composing poems between courses at the University of Georgia. He did not set out to be a star. He aspired to be a sports writer. However, fate, combined with sadness and a dusty old guitar, had other intentions. In the late 1950s, Bill wrote City Lights, a somber ballad about loneliness in the light of street lamps. Ray Price recorded it, and it quickly rose to number 1. That music did not only unlock doors, it blasted them off their hinges. Bill moved to Nashville with one song under his belt and a burning fire in his chest. However, it wasn't stardom that followed. There was pressure. There are also ghosts. The farther Bill delved into the country music scene, the more he realized how haunted it was. Legends passed through the Opry like shadows. Lefty, Hank, Patsy. Everyone was chasing something. Fame, money, escape. However, no one appeared to have found peace. That hit Bill quickly. He once stated that he was surrounded by talent so raw and passionate that it felt like lightning struck every time someone picked up a microphone. But what about the largest shadow? Hank Williams, Sr. Hank had already died when Bill arrived in Nashville. However, his presence remained constant in the room. People still talked about him as if he were alive, not with reverence but with terror. Stories circulated about Hank's fury, demons, and prophecy. Hank reportedly, allegedly looked a young vocalist dead in the eyes and stated, "You won't last. This place will consume you." That narrative stayed with Bill. And then one night, he heard the same thing said straight to him. And it is when everything changed. The real mystery of Hank Williams was not how he died, but what he left behind, and what Bill Anderson has borne ever since. In the early years of Bill Anderson's Nashville career, whispers of Hank Williams Sr. trailed him like a ghost that wouldn't leave. Bill had heard every story, benders, breakdowns, and backseat deaths. But it wasn't until he walked into the Ryman Auditorium that he felt Hank's presence in his bones. The Opry stage still smelt of old whiskey and unfulfilled aspirations. And backstage, it was as if Hank's chair had never been emptied. Some claimed Hank had cursed it. Others claimed he never truly left. What about Bill? Bill believed that the truth was heavier than any myth. In a 1961 radio interview that was scarcely broadcast and mostly forgotten, Bill told a scary story that never made headlines. He was rehearsing alone one night in an empty Opry hall, with the rafters quiet except for his own echo. As he began to strum, the stage lights flickered. Faint static crackled from the speakers. Then, as clearly as the notes he was playing, a phrase spoke from the darkness. "Don't sing it till you live it." Bill turned around. Nobody was there. He put it down to exhaustion until it happened again the following week. This time, the whisper said, "That's what killed me." He did not inform many people, not at first. Nashville was a town that devoured the weak. If you demonstrated weakness, you were eaten. However, in his journals, which were recently disclosed by his family, Bill had recurring dreams in which he sat in a smoky bar booth with Hank Sr. As the discourse became darker, Hank would lean in, his eyes empty, and say things like, "You know too much," or "Tell them what I did, but only when they are ready." These were not just dreams. They got obsessive. Bill began to write songs that seemed like messages. Mama sang a song called "Still," "The Corner of My Life," all steeped in longing, spiritual perplexity, and the weight of invisible realities. Some fans described him as a sentimentalist. Others claimed he had the saddest voice in country music. Those closest to him were aware, however, Bill was channeling something, or someone. By the mid-1960s, Bill had cemented his place among the Opry's elite, but it did not make him happy. His marriage was fracturing. He was losing contact with his children. Money arrived, but so did isolation. He'd remain late in the studio, alone with his guitar and his thoughts, creating verses that he'd never show anyone. He once told a producer, "Every time I sing, I feel like Hank is watching from the balcony." And nobody laughed. They all felt it too. The mystique of Hank Sr. was still alive, but Bill Anderson was carrying something else, a burden, a secret. And it would be decades before he confessed what Hank had done to him and why he never fully healed. Bill Anderson's personal life unraveled gradually during the late 1960s and early 1970s. It was slow, unpleasant, and virtually silent to the outside world. On stage, he was still Whisperin' Bill, the soft-spoken Southern poet, crooning words about love and grief as if he had never experienced them. But behind closed doors, his marriage was disintegrating. His wife, Bet, had grown tired of the industry's late hours, weird phone calls, and Bill's increasing emotional isolation. She once informed a close friend that he was chasing ghosts, not dreams, and they will not allow him to adore the living. Bill had more evenings at the Grand Ole Opry than he did at home. His children later said that they rarely saw their father, save when he appeared on television. The silky voice that consoled millions never made it back to the dinner table. When the divorce occurred, it was quiet but heartbreaking. Bill never publicly struck out or caused a scandal. However, those close to him say it shattered him more than anything else, except maybe for the remorse he felt for Hank. Because Bill was receiving letters throughout the entire process. Anonymous, typewritten, postmarked in Alabama, and always signed H. The letters were not threats. These were reminders. Phrases like, "You owe me a story," or "It ain't over, Bill." At first, he assumed it was a cruel joke. However, following a 1974 concert in Montgomery, a woman in her 70s approached him backstage carrying a manila package. She murmured, "This belongs to Hank. He wanted it given to the proper person." Inside, there were 3 handwritten pages. Hank's final song was never recorded. Bill read it once and then stored it for decades. The lyrics were chilling. They mentioned betrayal, spiritual debt, and a young poet whom I condemned before my death. Bill didn't talk about it, not even with his bandmates. However, his music changed. In a rare 1985 interview, he admitted that he occasionally writes songs that he does not remember writing, like "Someone else pushed the pen." That same year, he recorded "When You Leave That Way You Can Never Go Back," a song on mortality, regret, and missed opportunities. Country radio aired it. Fans adored it. However, few realized it was based on words from Hank's missing pages. Financially, Bill was still doing well. He had many sources of income, including song royalties, touring, and television appearances. But emotionally, he was unraveling. An acquaintance from the Opry once stated that Bill had everything: fame, money, and admiration. But he appeared to be waiting for something or someone. He purchased a cabin in the woods outside Murfreesboro, Tennessee. Isolated and silent, Neighbors reported hearing music late into the night, but no one ever saw visitors. Some speculated that he was finally losing his mind, but in reality, Bill was prepared. For what? Nobody could really say. All he ever told anyone was this: "One day, I'll tell the world what actually happened to Hank, but only when I'm old enough to be believed." That day was decades distant. But the ghost of Hank Williams Sr. was no longer confined to Bill's fantasies. It had taken root in his real life and was becoming louder. By the late 1990s, Bill Anderson's life had been through storms that celebrities could not protect him from. The man who once crafted love songs as gentle as falling rain is now dealing with the kind of heartbreak that cannot be rhymed away. Betty, his wife who had supported him through hard times and gold records, died in 1997 after a long fight with cancer. They have been married 44 years. Bill was not only devastated by her loss, it hollowed him out. After the funeral, Bill did not return to the studio for nearly 2 years. Friends claimed he spent most days at his Murfreesboro home, pacing the halls like a man caught between two worlds. His piano accumulated dust, his journals remained closed. The mansion, which was once filled with laughing and music, has become a mausoleum of quiet. A close buddy later confessed that he had never been the same. You could tell in his eyes that he was carrying more than just pain. And perhaps he was, since during those silent years, Bill resumed talking about Hank. Not in interviews, but in whispers with individuals he trusted. He'd relate an old, yellowed letter that Hank Williams Sr. had written to him decades ago and kept buried in a locked box. A letter that no one else had ever seen. In a letter, Bill claimed to read aloud in the middle of the night, as if saying a prayer he didn't comprehend. Something weird occurred while he was grieving. Bill began writing again, but his songs were darker, harsher, and almost haunted. Titles like The Corner of My Life and Too Country were more than just words. They were confessions. He also stated once that some phrases did not sound like his own words. In a rare 1999 interview, Bill stated, "It's like Hank was leaning over my shoulder." But that was not all. There were rumors that Bill went to Montgomery late at night, silently placed flowers on Hank's grave, and stayed for hours alone. Locals say they saw him talking and gesturing as if he was arguing with someone who wasn't present. By the early 2000s, Bill's career had begun to rebound. He wrote songs for Brad Paisley, Kenny Chesney, and others, demonstrating that his talent had not dimmed. However, those who knew him best reported that the brightness in his eyes never entirely returned. It included his anguish over the loss of his wife. But the weight of that letter, as well as the secret Hank had left behind, weighed heavily on Bill. Bill Anderson has now decided to break his silence decades later, at the age of 87. Because of the letter that Hank wrote, it didn't merely commend Bill's abilities. It contained a warning and a confession that might completely change fans' perceptions of the country music king. What was in the letter that Hank Williams Sr. handed to Bill Anderson? For nearly 70 years, Bill kept it hidden away. He never told the press about it, published it in a biography, or addressed it in his songwriting courses. However, some close to Bill claimed that he would occasionally pull it out when he had too much to drink or couldn't sleep. He'd read it aloud with shaky hands before returning it to the fireproof box under his bed, as if it were a cursed relic. Anderson finally broke his silence on the letter shortly after his 87th birthday. He did not do it on a podcast or in a confessional memoir. He brought it up discreetly during a low-key fanquanda in the Grand Ole Opry's backstage room. Someone asked, "What is the most personal thing Hank Williams has ever said to you?" Bill looked down, became silent, and then added, "He warned me not to follow his path because I would end up haunted." People laughed uneasily, supposing it was a poetic metaphor. But Bill did not smile. He went on to say that he sensed something dangerous in me, that I was too good at writing about pain. He warned me that if I leaned too far into that world, I would never be able to return. Bill then claimed Hank had confessed something deeper in that letter, namely that he did not believe he would live past the age of 30, and that the demons he portrayed in his songs were beginning to follow him in reality. He wrote, "I feel like I'm already dead, but my body hasn't figured it out yet." Bill claimed he was just 23 when he received that letter. He didn't comprehend it at first, but it gradually became clearer with time. The letter, according to Bill, also mentioned a night in 1951 when Hank thought he saw a shadow man standing in his dressing room after a show in Kentucky. Not a stagehand, not a fan, something else. Hank described the apparition as tall, without a cap, and with unblinking eyes. He didn't speak, the letter stated. He simply nodded. I felt as if I were being informed I was finished. That single incident, whether actual or imagined, defined the rest of Hank's downward slide. Bill's attachment to the letter was not motivated by the ghost story. It was the last line. "If you receive this, please do not respond. Just remember me before the darkness took over." Bill admitted that he never responded, but he saved the letter. He's also claimed to have seen the shadow guy throughout the years. Not just once, but 3 times. Bill Anderson always took pride in his ability to stay grounded. He wasn't a wild man, unlike the other boys of his generation who set fire to hotel rooms or poured whiskey into their cereal bowls. He was the calm one, the gentleman in country music. But he acknowledges that one night in 1988, something shattered. His wife had died 2 months before. Cancer, quick and harsh. They had been married for decades, and without her the house felt hollow. The quietness in the halls was more than just silent. It was accusatory. Empty frames, laundry that has not been folded completely. Her perfume was still lingering in the closet, like if she hadn't completely departed. He was unable to sleep that night, even with sleeping medications. So he sat at the kitchen table, going through old fan letters and lyric scraps. That's when he discovered it again. The envelope included Hank's name written in blue ink. He opened it after many years. Bill read it again and felt the words hit him differently. It was as if Hank had written them for this specific occasion, grieving, hollow. He was afraid that the gloom would swallow him up. What about being followed by something otherworldly? It has chilled him now. Not because it sounded crazy, but because it suddenly made sense. He laid the letter down and entered his living room. That's when he noticed it. A towering person stood near the fireplace just beyond the edge of light. Still. No hat, no blinking. Bill froze. His pulse quickened. He wanted to scream but could not. His throat clenched. The figure did not move. He did not speak. But Bill claimed he felt something between them. A recognition, a warning. Then it was gone. There's no noise, no flash, just left. He didn't tell anyone for years. Who would believe this? But after that night, Bill's songwriting evolved. He began writing more about loss, about ghosts, about how the past resurfaces when you least expect it. Critics claimed he had entered his haunted age. What they didn't realize was that he wasn't creating metaphors. He was describing what he saw. Bill Anderson's music became softer and eerier in the years after that terrifying meeting. Fans saw it right away. Songs like Still and Once a Day were already filled with melancholy. However, his later catalog reflected a deeper anguish, as if he were speaking through a veil. Friends claimed he had become increasingly withdrawn. It was almost as if he was continuously listening for something that the others couldn't hear. Behind closed doors, Bill began collecting items. Old tapes, Hank Sr. artifacts, and handwritten lyrics. Anything that connected him to a generation of legends who were gradually fading. He wasn't hoarding for popularity or resale value. He was chasing something, a link, a thread leads to the other side. He told a close friend once, "I don't think Hank's done talking. I believe he's just been waiting for the appropriate years." By 2011, Bill had transformed his basement into a sort of shrine. Not a flashy museum, something more intimate. The centerpiece was a battered radio from the 1940s, which he said still detected a peculiar static signal at 3:17 a.m. every Friday. There are no voices, just some faint guitar tones, and he characterized it as the sound of boots hitting gravel. Every time it played, he would sit down, silently, as if he was waiting for Hank to finish an idea he had begun in that letter decades ago. People close to him were worried. His son Jamie once asked him, "Do you think you're slipping?" Bill simply smiled and asked, "Slipping? No, I believe I'm tuning in." Then, in 2017, something happened that startled even Bill. During a usual cleaning, his housekeeper discovered an envelope jammed behind the piano. Bill stated he had never seen it before. Inside was a faded snapshot of Bill and Hank Williams taken backstage in 1952. Except that Bill doesn't recall ever taking the photograph. He had only seen Hank once, briefly, in 1951. He was certain of it. But there they were in the photo, laughing together, and on the back in Hank's distinct handwriting, "Bill, don't run when things start to make sense." Bill sat with the photograph for hours. He did not sleep that night. For the first time in decades, he felt terrified. In 2023, a hushed rumor spread among country music insiders. It was not in the tabloids. Initially, it was not even available online. It began backstage, in green rooms, with whispers between aging session players and longtime producers. People who have been in the industry since the 1950s. What about the rumor? Bill Anderson was planning to disclose something. Not a song, not an album, something else. Something he'd been holding on to for more than 50 years. It was named the Hank Tapes. Nobody knew what was on them, save that they were recorded sometime in the 1970s, after Bill became obsessed with Hank Williams's reputation. Some claimed it was just a rambling demo tape. Bill never finished the tribute record he started. Others claimed it was more than that. One person, a sound engineer who had previously worked on Bill's early sessions, claimed the tapes were not music, but recollections. He claimed Bill had captured something unusual on them. Not lyrics, not a guitar, but a presence. As the hubbub built, Bill remained silent. Until one night in December, he came onto the Grand Ole Opry stage and took a longer than usual pause before speaking. "If you've ever heard a ghost speak in your ear," he explained, his voice shaking, "you'll understand what the following songs imply." He then performed a set of never-before-heard ballads, songs that sounded both ancient and completely new. Fans wept. One elderly audience member broke down in tears and had to be helped out. Something was different. The music seemed haunted. It was as if it was flowing through him rather than directly from Bill. Backstage after the show, a reporter questioned him if the Hank tapes were genuine. Bill did not blink. He just stated, "They were never mine to begin with." Weeks later, Bill announced his retirement from public service. He retreated to his house just outside Nashville. The same house in the basement still had the dusty radio, the framed photo of Hank, and an old briefcase that no one had ever seen him open. On his birthday, Bill posted a single statement on social media. "Certain songs are not written, they are remembered." The post went viral. Country stars of all ages began sharing their experiences about Bill, how he taught, guided, and occasionally warned them. He used to advise, "Listen carefully when the room gets quiet. That is where the truth lives." Bill Anderson, 87, rarely gives interviews these days. But people still talk about him as if he's a part of some ancient magic, a living connection between then and now. A man who saw something in Hank Williams years ago and hasn't stopped listening to it. and he took what he heard with him.